to you from the Forge of Freedom studio in the heart of America, a podcast dedicated to preserving freedom and inspiring personal success. Freedom is born and lives through you, the individual, and it dies in the shadows of tyranny. Motivating our listeners to become well-rounded, freedom-minded people with the body of an athlete, the mind of a stoic, and the spirit of a warrior. The tree of liberty lives on through you, the Forge of Freedom. And now here's your host, Alex Ooley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and this is episode 39 of the Forge of Freedom. Today I have attorney and firearms instructor Mike Ooley back in the studio for Monday Gun Day to discuss how to navigate the safety concerns you might encounter after a self-defense incident. Welcome to the show again, Mike.
Hey, good morning, Alex.
Good morning. So last week we talked about the 911 call after a critical incident or a self-defense encounter, and we talked about some of the nuances and concerns and sort of the context in which you would be making that 911 call. But just because you have survived the critical incident and just because you've called 911, that doesn't mean the safety concerns are over. There are numerous safety concerns, at least until the responding officers arrive. And we want to talk about some of those safety concerns and how to navigate those concerns so that you can not only survive the critical incident itself, but also the aftermath. So you want to say a little bit about that, Mike?
Yeah. First of all, I think usually we teach this. We'll talk about the 911 call and we'll talk about pointers there and what you ought to do or oughtn't do. We talked about that last week. And then usually we move in with respect to the aftermath. We talk about what responding police, how to handle responding police officers. And one of the crucial things is what to say to them. If anything, most criminal defense attorneys will tell you not to say anything. And we talk about the possibility of at least saying just a little bit, given the unique nature of a self-defense incident. We'll talk about maybe next week or the week after, not too long in the future, we'll talk about that. And by that, I mean how to handle the responding police officers. But as we were preparing for preparing to do that episode, I thought it might be constructive to spend a little extra time and sort of take the safety lessons out of all the phases of the aftermath and kind of talk about them uniquely and distinctly, because I think that's an incredibly important thing to be prepared for. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. And keep in mind, we're talking about this today to help you kind of visualize the situation and how you might handle a self-defense situation if you are in one, because visualization and thinking through it ahead of time is the key to success. Remember, our goal with this training or these podcasts, for that matter, that address these subjects is to help you be the person that doesn't say, this is surreal. We want you to be the person that says, I knew this was possible. I knew this could happen, and I know what to do. That's what we want you to achieve in these critical incidents. In all of these podcasts where we talk about self-defense and particularly firearms and self-defense, they all kind of, they're not distinct. They all kind of work together. And I'm going to go back again and I'll loop this or tie this together. We talked about a few weeks ago, Colonel Cooper and the combat triad. Mindset's the most important, marksmanship and gun handling. It's so important that you get those things down at that unconscious competence level, because these safety things we're going to talk about today, the 911 call we talked about last week, we're going to talk about responding to police officers. Those are all going to require you to solve a problem, that scene. That's what a gunfight is. It's problem solving at high speed. And you're going to have your cognitive skills to be able to do this. We can't tell you exactly what to do, and you're not going to be able to pull out a card and deal with the situation. You're going to have to think through it. That's why we talked about what we talked about a few weeks ago in terms of unconscious competence with respect to those gun handling skills. So anyway, I'm kind of getting long-winded there, but as background, remember last week, you're going to have to make the 911 call. That call a lot of times is the race to the phone, because I think, or we think, the system, lots of other people think, the system sort of labels the first person to call 911 as the victim, and the victim then identifies who the perpetrators are. So I think that's important from a system standpoint. And also keep in mind the bad guy may know how the system works, and he may call or she may call the system and lie to the system. And then you've got to dig yourself out of that hole. So make sure you make that 911 call. It's that 911 call, I'll be real brief, is going to be made after any defensive gun use. And by that, we mean you've discharged your firearm, you've pointed your firearm, you may only have your firearm at the low ready, you've revealed you have a firearm, put your hand on your firearm, or even you indicate to somebody that you have a gun. Those are all defensive gun uses that maybe stopped a bad guy from doing whatever the bad guy intended to do, and you're going to need to call 911.
And I'll certainly, if you haven't watched the 911, the episode that we did about the 911 call, I'll link to that in the show notes. Would certainly encourage you to go back and watch that. But just because you've called 911, that doesn't mean the responding officers are going to be there immediately, right? And so we're here today to talk about that sort of little gap between making the 911 call and when the officers arrive on scene, and how you can maintain your safety and the safety of potentially loved ones if you're not alone while you're on the scene.
Yeah, and remember the 911 call, you're going to give your name, and it may be you or it may be somebody else makes the 911 call, or in all likelihood, depending on where you're, unless you're in a really desolate area, and then you may not even have cell service, there's probably going to be multiple 911 calls that different people in and around the scene make. But anyway, you're going to give your name, location. You want to, I think, establish that active dynamic that I had to defend myself. And you're going to ask them to send police, EMS. And I think one of the things, if you recall from last week, this is starting to get into the safety a little bit. You need to describe yourself. I mean, I'm going to be the guy that's 58 years old. I've got a black T-shirt on, blue jeans. I'll have my hands on my white Ford 50 pickup truck when you pull into the lot or whatever. I mean, there's some safety. That's where you begin the safety. We also talked about whether or not you stay on the 911 call or not with the dispatcher. I'll refer to last week instead of taking a lot of time there. But there can be some safety benefits to staying on the line. There can be some legal downfalls to staying on the line.
It is recorded. So
it is recorded,
which can be an advantage if you know how to handle it.
So, like you said, we want to talk about that gap when you're at this. You've probably won the immediate critical the gunfight. The bad guys threaten your life. You face an immediate, otherwise unavoidable threat of death or grave bodily harm. You've stopped the threat, and now the cops are going to roll on the scene. Okay, and remember, we've always talked about. In these critical incidents, there's going to be these very, at least for some people, these almost debilitating physiological things that happen. And to the extent that they're debilitating for some people, I think it's because they don't realize they're going to happen, or they're not well trained, or they haven't visualized enough. They don't expect them. But remember, you're going to get this chemical dump that creates this, this innate freeze, flight, or fight reaction in most human beings, most animals. As a matter of fact, you're going to have impaired vision, auditory exclusion. Your heartbeat's going to race, probably not commensurate with the physical activity you're putting out. You're going to lose fine motor skills. Some people will lose major motor skills. Time distortion. You're going to be breathing hard. Memory distortion. And depending on your level of training, a lot of people are going to react very emotionally to the situation because they're the person that thinks this is surreal. They're the person that didn't know how this was going to go down or didn't expect any of this. So people are going to have different cerebral reactions to the situation. And we want you to be, that's why you're listening to this, we want you to be the person that can really use your higher levels of cognition to apply problem-solving skills to the situation. So keep in mind, all that may happen to you, but that same thing is going to be happening to responding police officers. And depending on their level of training, their ability to deal with the situation in a rational, logical, thoughtful way may or may not be there. Some police officers are going to be well-trained, squared away. Others are going to be not so much so. I'll leave it at that. I mean, they're just like any other civilian. You never know what you're going to draw out of the deck.
Well, and they don't know. I mean, they know they're responding to the scene of a shooting, and so they're going to be going through, like you said, a lot of these same physiological effects that we are going through, or the person involved in the critical incident is going through. And so you have to be aware of that and cognizant of that, and help to ensure the safety of you and the officer when they arrive on the scene. And there are some things you can do to help that process. But I think, if it's okay with you, Mike, we'll talk about a story that you found recently. And we've got a link from the reload.com, which is a site run by Stephen Gutkowski. And it's a story out of Arvada, Colorado, about an incident where a Good Samaritan stepped in and then was unfortunately harmed when the police arrived. You want to talk about that story?
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to come up with a story is I think this is consistent with the whole visualization notion. And we'll use this story today. But I would encourage folks to, if you hear something in the news, or if you read about it in a self-defense incident, or I guess in particular, you see a video on the news or whatever, think about what you would do at the scene to make you and others safe. You, your family, the responding officers, and think about what you would do in that particular situation, because every situation is different. And keep in mind, I mean, we want to step kind of today, kind of think about yourself as that responding police officer. Like you said, Alex, that's a good point. This police officer just knows he or she is going to the scene of a shooting. He or she doesn't know if there's one bad guy, two bad guys, who the bad guy is. We hope that they know that the guy in the black t-shirt is a good guy by this point. We've started that notion. But I think this was Mossad. I heard it from first, Mossad Ayub. He talked about the fact when those police officers roll up on the scene, and you may have your firearm out, the bad guy has been stopped and on the ground, perhaps blood around. I mean, you're doing he's doing a remarkable imitation of a victim, and you're the perpetrator potentially. So think about what kind of perceptions these police officers may have. But this story out of Arvada, Colorado, and like I said, Alex said, the Reload has a good article about this, I think. And I've read some of the complaint that was filed in that. There was a civil suit filed. But anyway, there was a crazy murderer that showed up on the scene in Arvada, Colorado, which is near Denver, I think. This guy had a beef with the local Arvada Police Department. He showed up in his truck, got out. He ends up walking up behind a Arvada police officer, not quite, but almost shoots the Arvada police officer in the back, I think, with a shotgun. I think he tries to get the police officer's name. The police officer turns around and he shoots the police officer and kills the police officer. The police officer has no chance at all to react. So very unfortunate how this starts, tragic. But if you listen to the complaint that was ultimately filed in this case, there's an allegation that there were multiple Arvada police officers that saw at least part of what happened was going on here or heard about it. And the complaint says, instead of worrying about that they worried about their own self-preservation and didn't leave the little substation that they were in because they thought they were underarmed and only had light body armor, probably that would only stop handguns and not rifles. I don't know that. But anyway, this gentleman by the name of Mr. Hurley, who was visiting, I think, a Army Navy surplus store or whatever. Here's the commotion. Here's the shooting. He ends up running outside and engages the perpetrator, the bad guy. He ends up firing, I think, like 6 shots. 5 of them hit him. He stops the perpetrator. Ultimately, the perpetrator dies, I think, there at the scene. Well, after he stops the perpetrator, and evidently he's had some training. People that see him at the scene think he's trained. I think some of them think he's a police officer or SWAT or whatever because of how he moves around the scene and that sort of thing. Anyway, the suit that ultimately, and I'm getting this from the complaint that was filed that I read, it alleges that one of the police officers actually observed this good guy Samaritan for about 10, 11 seconds, watched him, and ends up that the police officer had an opportunity to assess what the good guy was doing, but nonetheless, he went outside the substation where he was at, and without any warning or warning shots, stop, police, that sort of thing, he shoots Hurley in the buttocks, in the back, and ultimately Hurley dies. And I think what's important about this case that I haven't told you about yet is that at the time that the police officer shoots Mr. Hurley, who has stopped the perpetrator, goes to the perpetrator, who has an AR-15, and he decides that he's going to pick the AR-15 up and he's going to unload it. So he's kind of over the body and fiddling with the AR-15 when this police officer comes up and shoots the Good Samaritan. Ultimately, the district attorney out there doesn't file charges against this police officer, and basically says that, due to the fog of war and this long investigation, that the police officer actions didn't violate policy and procedure, and no charges were filed. It was sort of a, due to the fog of war. In hindsight, maybe it wasn't reasonable what the police officer did, but at the time of the incident, knowing what the police officer knew, the actions were reasonable. I'm not sure that's exactly what the prosecutor said, but there was no prosecution.
So let me sort of recap this a little bit.
Yep. Sorry, I rambled.
No, that's okay. So we're at a shopping center, Arvada, Colorado. Bad dude shows up with the intention, apparently, of killing police officers. He does, in fact, fatally wound or shoot an officer. And there are other officers on scene, but they don't intervene, at least initially. So this Good Samaritan shows up, this Hurley that you're talking about, kills the bad dude, and bad dude's laying on the ground. Hurley bends over to pick up the rifle that the bad dude had. And as he's picking up the rifle, the officers who had been observing this interaction take place, one of the officers steps out and shoots Hurley, either because of mistaken identity or just he'd succumbed to these physiological effects on the scene and made a grave mistake. We don't know for sure. But Hurley, the good guy, bent over to pick up the firearm and was shot in the buttocks, right? And eventually succumbed to his injury.
Yeah, and you can watch videos out there. The police on the scene, the officials, they had a hard time sorting out what was going on for a long time. I'm not sure why Hurley died. He probably, unfortunately, died as a result of loss of blood. But it took a while, I think, to get him to the hospital or to address his situation. But it wasn't even, my impression was, it wasn't a matter of Hurley immediately got to the perpetrator, bent over, and he was shot. One of the things, and we'll talk about in a little bit, I guess Mr. Hurley kind of struggled. He was going to unload the perpetrator's AR-15, but I recall reading one of the witness statements said he was sort of struggling with the AR-15 because he kept his firearm, his pistol, which he'd used to neutralize the perpetrator, in his hand while he was trying to manipulate the AR-15. So I think that required him to have that AR-15 in his, to the extent he was required to have it in his hand at all. We'll talk about that, but he had it in his hand and was trying to handle it maybe longer than most people would if they were just simply unloading an AR-15 and were familiar with that firearm.
So we tell that story because it's illustrative. Like you said, it helps people visualize a scene, an incident where they might be involved in something like this. But that leads us into sort of what lessons people should know, what things people should know regarding safety of a scene after a critical incident.
Yeah, and I just want to say one thing. A lot of what I gave you there was from the complaint itself. So that's sort of obviously civil complaints. There was a civil complaint filed. The mother of Mr. Hurley had filed a suit in Colorado. I don't know what the results of that suit were. I couldn't find it, actually. But obviously, a complaint is one-sided in terms of the characterization of the police officers. So anyway, what are some of the lessons? Well, I think some of the things that you can think about here. Number one, as you move around the scene, the critical incident scene after it happens, I think it's incredibly important that you get your gun holstered right away.
If you're certain that there are no other threats around.
Yeah. And always remember, we talked about this. You need to maintain situational awareness and get that holster or get that gun holstered if you can, because we don't want other concealed carry weapon permit holders that might have a firearm, cops. We just don't want people to misidentify us as the perpetrator. Remember, if you stop the threat, just like Mossad says, that bad guy laying on the ground is doing a remarkable impression of a victim, okay? And you as a perpetrator. So get that thing holstered. That's why it's important. I'll go back again. Our gun handling. Do we have a 1.5 second draw from our holster, okay, to first shot? If we've got those skills, it's a lot safer to have that gun holstered because we can get it back into action much more quickly. So get it holstered if you can. Try not to, once again, think about my thing about earlier about this bad guy's doing a remarkable impression of a victim. Try not to be or if you can and it's safe, don't even be pointing the firearm at the guy on the ground or gal on the ground if you don't have to. Once again, this is about perceptions of and what people are going to think when they roll on the scene. And if you just got your, you can get it out of the holster quickly, hopefully that will be enough.
And hopefully you can simply just reholster your firearm. That's the best solution. If the scene is safe, reholster it. But if you don't feel like you can reholster it because there may be additional threats, or you believe the person on the ground may still be somewhat of a threat, make sure that when the police arrive, you either holster it or you drop the firearm immediately, because you don't want to be victim of a mistaken identity.
That's what it amounts to. And we want to get that gun put up if we can. And by the way, I mentioned earlier, Mr. Hurley evidently had his gun out. He still had his, if you read some of the stuff the prosecutor provided anyway, evidently still had his gun out and was trying to manipulate the AR-15, and that was not a good situation there. So anyway, which brings up another point. Is it necessary to secure the bad guy's gun? I would submit to you, if the bad guy has been stopped, you probably don't need to approach the bad guy and do anything to manipulate his gun. Because once again, you're handling a gun. You don't know where a police officer may come from, or somebody else that's another good guy that may misidentify you while you're handling this firearm. And I'd submit to you, particularly if it's a rifle, because rightly or wrongly, a lot of people, whether it's an AK or an AR or some other rifle or even a shotgun, they sort of think that's a bad guy gun if there's been a shooting. And that's the way people are. I don't think that it's a bad guy gun, but some people may have that perception. So, if you don't have to handle the bad guy's gun, don't handle it. Just leave it there. If he stopped, he stopped. And the gun is not going to be, really an issue. And of course, if there are other bad guys and you're afraid they're going to get it, then you may need to do that. Or if you have to leave the scene for safety reasons, it may be necessary. But probably in most cases, you're not going to have to secure the bad guy's gun. Once again, see, we're talking about problem solving. You've got to have you're going to have your cognition about you to try to make these determinations at the time. Also, you may want to find a better position. Leaning over the bad guy with a gun in your hand may not be the best position to be in to see what's happening in terms of approaching police officers or other good guys. So you might want to find a place of cover somewhere. Number one, from the bad guy or other bad guys. And also, if you can provide some cover for you that will allow folks coming on the scene to have additional time to kind of process the scene so they can quickly identify you as not a bad guy, maybe begin verbal interaction with the responding police officers. Hey, don't shoot. I'm the one that called 911, and that's, we be careful what we say, but you want to establish a better position probably if you can. It's going to be dependent on the situation.
Yeah, you want to be in a good position to greet the responding officers, but in a safe way, and in a you don't want to leave the scene. So we're not suggesting that at all, because flight often equals guilt, but you do want to find a better position and a safer position if you can.
Yeah, and it may be just simply where you get a wider angle view of the scene too. Mr. Hurley was right there with the bad guy. you get back from the scene, you can see more and kind of process what's going on a little bit better. And I'm going to, and this kind of brings up a point. I'll once again, I want to give credit to Masada Yu about this. This is where I heard it first, but he talks about this welcoming committee. I think you use that nomenclature, but he talks about the 3 rings of safety too. It's probably not a bad idea to have a bystander who can go out a little farther on the periphery of the scene and meet the police that are responding. We want those police to have responding police to have as much information as we can. We want to bring them down in terms of their excitement in arriving at the scene. We want to bring them up in terms of the information they have so that a mistake is not made. But it's a good idea probably to send somebody. I mean, if you're in a mall or a store, send the store manager out to the outside to greet the police as they come in, so the manager, he or she, can inform the police of what's going on. Send a family member. You got to make sure the family member understands that they need to be completely unthreatening, that sort of thing. But it's a good idea to do that. I think.
And the point of this three rings of safety that we're going to talk about here in just a moment is to put the officers at ease, to give them as much information as you can and create this buffer between them and you before they arrive, so that they know as much as possible when they arrive on the scene. And that helps make the scene safer, helps that the scene safer for you and for them.
Yeah. And so, kind of the rings is that the first one's that outermost ring. And I think that's mostly the 911 call. And that's why I tell you, for instance, to, give a description of yourself. I'm in my late 50s. I've got a black t-shirt on. My hands will be here, or I'm wherever, depending on the situation. And that describes you. Make sure that they understand that's a description of the good guy. And if you send somebody, the store manager or your spouse, to greet the police, make sure that that's repeated over and over again, who the good guy is. And with your description, try not to use things that change, like a hat, for instance, or sunglasses or glasses as a description. It's okay to do that, I guess, but keep in mind that hat may fall off and may not be there. In the Arvada incident, it was interesting. One of the things that the police, the good guy had a red shirt on, the bad guy had a black shirt on. But there was still confusion. One of the police officers, I think it was the one that killed Mr. Hurley, he was questioned about, what his perceptions were about the bad guy's clothing versus the good guy's clothing. And he thought that somebody had taken a hoodie off, so it wasn't applicable, something to that effect. But anyway, it's important that you give a good, solid description of who the good guy is in this situation. Next is the middle ring. And that is, once again, I'm repeating myself, but that's the person, that's the greeter, that's the helper that you have that meets the police away from the scene, giving them information.
That's what Masada Yu calls the welcoming committee.
That's the welcoming committee.
And,
yes.
And what they're doing essentially is repeating the message that you've conveyed on the 911 call to the officers at the scene, but away from you on the inner ring. Okay. And away from the site of the critical incident itself. Yep. So again, you're providing them with information, you're helping them get acquainted with the scene and what happened.
So this inner ring then is you, and that's how you react to the police. You're the person that's going to help the police figure this out. Okay. You've got your hands where they can see them, because they're going to look to your hands. Your firearm is holstered. Your firearm was probably better if it's even concealed again. You're going to comply you may get knocked to the ground, handcuffed, treated roughly. You're the guy that's, trying to help them sort this out as quickly as possible. You're going to take non-threatening postures with them. And you're not going to make any sudden movements. You're going to move slowly. You're going to kind of be calming to them. That's the person you want to be in that inner circle, or that inner ring, I should say.
One thing I would like to mention here too is what's called the halo effect. And that's this tendency for us to see the scene from our own perspective. And it's basically saying, I'm so certain that I'm the good guy. Other people must see it that way as well. But they have no clue what happened. They weren't there when it happened, more than likely. And you have to recognize that the officers, especially when they arrive, they don't know that you're the good guy. So you have to make sure that you're, like you said, Mike, in as non-threatening position as possible. Have the firearm either holstered or on the ground. Have your hands where they're visible. No sudden movements. Completely non-threatening.
Yep. And just remember their perception. You got to let them build their perception of the situation that's consistent with reality. You've got to stay alive to allow that to happen. And they're going to be all pumped up with this adrenaline and trying to figure out what's going on. So you've got to be the assistant here. You've got to be the one that squares them away. And at this juncture, I think it's important that you have already, when this critical incident occurs, you've had to go through this previously, at least in your own mind, about what's going to happen here and how to react. And that's why we're talking about this today.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, just to kind of recap a little bit, we've talked about obviously the 911 call, which we talked about in more detail last week, but we talked about making sure that you have the firearm holstered if it's safe to do so. Make sure that you ensure your safety, find a better position if you can, so that you're in a better position when the officers do arrive, so that you're in a safer position during that time until they arrive. Don't leave the scene. And if you have time, try to get people on scene to assist you, especially if they're people you can trust, so that you can establish that welcoming committee, so that you can convey the message, so that you can provide that buffer between you and the responding officers, so that you can put them at ease and provide them with the most information possible.
Now, when we say provide them with the most information possible, here's the caveat. We haven't talked about what you're going to say or not say, if anything, to the first responding officers. We'll talk about that next week or before long anyway. But it doesn't mean you're a complete open book in terms of talking about times and distance, that sort of thing. All you're trying to do is establish that the fact that you're the good guy and the bad guy's been stopped and nobody else needs to get shot here.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the big deal. So
we talked about the Arvada story, and there are all sorts of incidents where you can, especially if you watch John Correa's YouTube channel, Active Self-Protection, where you can use stories about critical incidents to imagine how you would handle the aftermath. Not only the critical incident itself, but the aftermath. Are you in a restaurant? Are you at a gas station? Are you at a retail store? Are you at your own home? How would you handle the aftermath in those situations? And it's important to visualize, because like you mentioned at the beginning, Mike, and like we've talked about in previous episodes, you want these tasks, these skills, to be skills that you are competent at an unconscious level. It's just second nature. I knew this could happen and I know what to do. Okay. And so the more you visualize that, the more you train it, the more likely you are to respond appropriately when the incident happens. Anything else you'd like to say on that, Mike?
I think that was a concise recap.
Okay.
Good job.
All right. Well, I think that's where we'll leave it for this week. Next week, like Mike has alluded to, we'll talk about how to interact with the responding officers. So we've talked about the 911 call. We've talked about this gap between the 911 call and when responding officers arrive. Next week, we'll get into the responding officers.
Yeah, nobody's going to get shot. The scene is safe. Now the police officers want to know what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where we got to be careful about what we say, if anything.
Yeah, exactly. So look forward to that for next Monday, Gun Day. On Sunday, though, I'll be releasing an episode with Lawrence Reed about a short book he wrote called Are We Good Enough for Liberty? So keep an eye out for that next Sunday. And next Monday, we'll get into how to handle the response with the responding officers. So until then, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter at Forge of Freedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.